Let's go.
All all right, we have Mr. Robbie Rollup in the house. So for context, I've known Andy and Robbie since 2023. I think like start of 2023. Like I remember Andy was at like 3K followers or something back then. Um, so Robbie, like for this video, what I basically want to sort of give out is, if someone wants to start a media house in crypto, like how should they be thinking about it? What are the steps they should go through, and how did you guys build your brand? And like obviously there's no one better to sort of test this to you guys. Yeah, maybe let's start off with like how you and Andy met. Like how did the roll up start?
Yeah, sure. And guys, thanks for having me on. It's refreshing to answer questions and not ask them. You guys are the host job is so underappreciated in the sense that it is more difficult to come up with the questions than to answer them. Like I
Yeah.
spend all day thinking about these things, but actually to come into someone else's domain and try to fit in there is really, really difficult. So yeah, shout out to all the podcast hosts out there and you
we're,
guys.
we're gonna clip this for them for sure, Robbie. So that's a great start to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for having me on. I met Andy in 2017. At the time, he and I were freshmen at the University of Florida. I'm still in Gainesville, Florida. I actually ended up graduating. I haven't hung my diploma, but I did graduate. I have the piece of paper. It is literally just that. It's just a piece of paper. No one in crypto has ever asked me what is my resume or anything like that or degrees. But I tell them anyway. I graduated math and philosophy at the University of Florida. Andy and I met in 2017. We were freshmen. I had been trading Bittrex shit coins at the time for about a year. Originally, I got started playing poker online with Bitcoin. Got into altcoins. Quickly started going down the risk curve. Found Bittrex as one exchange that I could trade some altcoins on. And then I ended up starting I started two companies before the Rollup. But they weren't sticky. They didn't really have the product market fit. And they were just extremely early. And I was immature. So they kind of fizzled out. But one of them was an educational company. It was with a company called You Can Trade. So I was kind of teaching people about crypto. It was primarily geared towards boomers at the time. It was like a subsidiary of TradeStation, which is like a top 10 online stock brokerage. I had an internship there over my kind of college career, and then they ended up hiring me full time, and I ended up being one of these like coaches for You Can Trade, specifically in their crypto domain, and then I ended up helping set up their crypto desk at that stock brokerage. But I left that because I went back to school. I did a little bit more remote, but then Andy and I met, and we really continued doing what him and I were doing through the University of Florida Bitcoin Club. That's where we met originally. We kind of hit it off. We were one of the few freshmen in there, and we kind of realized like there was a lot more opportunity that was coming into this space. And so, he had been trading a little bit himself and researching the space. So was I. And so we hit it off in 2017. We continued in this club, learning from one another. And this club is really, really important, not just because Andy and I met here, but because it set the stage for the Rollup. The whole purpose of this club was to learn from people that were smarter than us. And it first started out, there was only a handful of people in this club, but there was, Andy and I freshmen, and then there was juniors and seniors in this club that some of them had jobs in the space already. One of them was already a full-time contributor to MakerDAO in 2017, which is super early. Shout out Kenton Prescott. He's the man. And I was learning from him, and he was where I originally learned about over collateralization and lending markets on chain. And he was so patient and was really methodical in the way that he was explaining things. And it took me maybe three or four sessions of an hour in order for me to really understand over collateralized loans. I was like, why is someone going to borrow money if they already have the money? Didn't make sense. But through his patience, I understood it. And so he was an older student at the time. I was able to learn from him. There was other students that I was learning from as well. Someone, who was a major ETH guy at the time, and then another guy that was more like institutional blockchain. Shout out Nathan and Yoel. And then what ended up happening was I ended up becoming president of the club, and we started bringing in leadership from the industry. So we had, the Wolf of Wall Street's guy, if you've seen him, Scott Melker. We had other industry experts that were working at the time. We had the guys from Edge Wallet. We had all these people that already had applications, and they were tried and true builders that came into the club. And again, we were able to learn from them. And so it's really, really important that people understand the Rollup was inspired by this club, because I was able to learn so much. Andy was able to learn so much. And we wanted to essentially continue that outside of college and into a broader context where we could continue to learn about the industry. And for selfish as well as altruistic reasons, what we found was that people came in and we were able to increase our own knowledge, and we were able to gain an informational edge by learning from these people that were smarter than us. And so that gave us insight into opportunities that were out there, right? And we could go, buy these tokens or participate in these DAOs or go farm these emissions. What we ended up realizing is that people that watched the content ended up also learning along with us. And so then it was like, okay, we started this because Andy and I wanted to learn for selfish reasons. There's no doubt about it. Like, we wanted to increase our own edge, but we ended up putting the content out so that others could also learn. And that's what ended up happening is, people started learning from the content early on. We called ourselves DeFi Slate because, 2017 to 2021 is predominantly DeFi. And so we started doing these tutorials about DeFi, teaching people how to use Aave, how to swap, how to LP, what impermanent loss was. And we would basically do these screen share tutorials, teaching people how to use on-chain applications. And then 2022, bear market hit. The people that were in it for just kind of like yield farming and, how to make money easy, those people left. And the people that stayed on are the people that were building and really saw the opportunity in the technology to contribute to this space, and then ultimately build a business and go from there. And that's another thing that's really important, is that Andy and I we have that entrepreneurial spirit. I started my first company when I was 16. Andy dropped out in our sophomore year in 2018 to do e-commerce and start his own business. And we ended up, reconnecting in 2020 to start DeFi Slate, now the Rollup. And it's important because entrepreneurial spirit keeps us going, and it's what really runs through this entire industry. You got to be a self-starter. And so I still remember, when I graduated, the Rollup and DeFi Slate had been going on for about a year. I graduated with, my 2 degrees, and I sat down with my dad, I think that summer, and he was like, "All right, Rob, what are you going to do now? You graduated." And I could tell the inflection in his voice was like, it's time to go get a real job, like go into the real world, 9 to 5. I got my degree. I could go make 6 figures somewhere, be chilling, be good. And I was like, I think I'm going to stick with this crypto thing, this like podcast and educational company thing. And, I think I saw it in his eyes, the skepticism, and I'm a skeptic too. It was like, it was like, and I had a, the way to put this, I had a basketball coach that used to say this, like, and put it extremely well, which is that if you're going to do it, it better work. Like, if you're going to go against the coach, it better work, And so that's what ended up happening. That was 2020, 2021, because we had been in business about a year. And so we ended up continuing. I decided, look, I'm not going to go into the corporate 9 to 5 world. I'm going to stick with this educational company. We're going to continue to grow it, and turn it into a real business. And part of what contributed to that decision, and I realize it's a long-winded answer. I'm about to finish up, but what contributed to that decision was the time scale. I was 22 at the time when I graduated, maybe 23. And I was going into the corporate world, and to get any kind of senior position and make some decent cash and really be in a position of success, you had to have 3 to 5 years experience. That's just the way the corporate world works. And then you climb the ladder from there. And given the entrepreneurial spirit inside me, that was not my game. I was not ready to just, give my life away to this corporate hierarchy where I had to start at the bottom because I didn't have 3 to 5 years experience. I was coming out of college. However, contrast that with crypto and blockchain, It is a pure meritocracy. We have guys like M Team, 16 years old, yapping his head off, that are up there with Vitalik and Justin Drake in terms of like the gravitas that he holds. Shout out that guy. We angeled into Spire. That kid is going places. And so I just say this to illustrate the fact that, crypto and blockchain, anyone that has this intellectual curiosity inside of them and the passion to learn will succeed. You don't need 3 to 5 years experience. And frankly, I got involved in 2016, 2017. I had 3 to 5 years experience. Everyone else, the industry is only 10 years old. Everyone else was on this same level playing field. I was, on the same level playing field as 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds that had been in business for 30 years, but they hadn't been in crypto and blockchain for 30 years. All of us had the same level of experience. And that meant that I was on par with these guys. And the specific domain knowledge for this particular industry, we were able to share that experience and end up growing at a similar point. And so that all contributed to the decision to not only start DeFi Slate in the Rollup, but to continue it past college. That's how we got started. I'll pause here. I can talk about how we grew DeFi Slate in the Rollup and ultimately what led to our growth and success, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no worries. I think we all share like a ton of similarities in our journey into crypto. And talking about Rollup and what it was before Rollup, Rollup does a lot of things right now, and that's not how it started, right? So could you dive into like what is the first thing that you guys did, and how did you guys branch out and open up so many different media opportunities that you support different projects and educate the audiences? So where do you start, and how did you kind of decide to, okay, it's now time to branch out and kind of double down on these different opportunities that you could leverage?
Yeah, happy to. So, like I said, we were doing these tutorials early on, teaching people how to use the applications on chain. If you go back to the very first episode, and it's still on YouTube and everywhere, you can go check out DeFi by Design episode 1 on the Rollup's channel, and you'll see it's just Andy and I talking to each other. There's no guest. It's just him and I just shooting the shit, just talking about our perspective on the industry. And again, this is the through line in all of our educational content. It's I learn from you, you learn from me, and everyone can watch and learn from each other. And it really builds this collective learning experience and this collective learning process that allows all of us to increase our knowledge base. And frankly, like win-win is kind of an overused term. And I slip into the philosophical areas sometimes, but it really feels like a win-win because everyone is able to learn and be better off. So that's kind of how we got started. That was the original inspiration. It was born out of this club. That first episode didn't have a guest, and we didn't even really start getting into the tutorials. That wasn't until we really started to see more and more applications on chain that we started teaching people how to use them. But we were talking about our perspective on the industry. Slowly but surely, we started bringing on guests. And I think there was an inflection point and a light bulb moment early on before we even made a single dollar. It was the idea that one guest has, their perspective and shares it with us. And it was the idea of leverage. Essentially, we can leverage one guest to get another guest and another guest and another guest. And that became this idea of like network marketing that was really like a through line in our conversations and allowed us to really stimulate our growth. So we ended up, having one guest. Now, if you fast forward that to today, it's the saying that, everyone in the world is connected by something like 7 degrees of separation, right? And so today, everyone in the industry, we like to say, is like either in our network or only 1 degree of separation. The entire space is like a friend of a friend away at most. And so that was the idea of growing the network. It was not only on social media, but it was also face-to-face or screen to screen as we have these conversations, the idea of leveraging our connections that we had at the time, either through the blockchain club. And I think, our second or so episode was someone that, was in the industry from the university blockchain club. We were able to get them. And then we said, hey, who else do you think we should have on? Or, who else in the network is has a gainful perspective, an insightful perspective that we should learn from. And we just rinse and repeat, just, and just continued that process until we ended up, learning and talking to more and more impactful and insightful people. That ended up growing our knowledge base. People ended up hearing about the Rollup. Another really important piece to this leverage is that as we posted these podcasts and people that we talked to retweeted and co-marketed these podcasts, our growth and network also grew and started to extend into the people that we talked to because they were retweeting and amplifying our content. That led to our growth. People ended up seeing us that we didn't even talk to. Then we started getting inbound. People started hitting us up. Hey, can we come on the podcast? And then, we're in a position of really filtering out, what we're trying to do on this show. And that ended up leading to kind of like where we are today, plenty of inbound and outbound. I can speak to the revenue piece a little bit as well. Early on, we had these conversations, but, we needed to make some money. And so our first dollar that we made was a grant from Aave Grants DAO. And at the time, I think they were like it was either right before or right after the transition from ETHLend. If for anyone who doesn't remember, Aave was previously ETHLend. They rebranded to Aave. Token went up like 10x. And that gave us our start because, we ended up getting a grant. It was in Lend tokens. And then they rebranded, blew up during DeFi summer. We didn't sell. We ended up getting the capital appreciation on top of the income. And it was like, okay, now we have a capital base where we don't have to go like take on corporate jobs. We can actually commit full time to this. So again, through leveraging our network, through leveraging other people's network, it was like our network became their network became our network. That's still the way in which we work today, is leveraging other people's networks, and that they leverage ours, because this ultimately builds a greater collective network, which is a win-win process. The same is true for people and for knowledge, in my opinion. We can grow our collective knowledge and collective networks and end up with a greater overall collective.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I think if everyone in the industry is one away from Robbie, everyone in the industry is two away from me, because I know Robbie. That's a flex. But yeah, Robbie, like, so you guys have the podcast, there's the newsletter, there's also the website. How many different media opportunities are there? And, if you're okay talking about it, like, what is kind of the revenue percentage of each of these media outlets?
Yeah. So, like I said, the first dollar we made was through a grant from Aave Grants DAO. Really cool full circle moment, as we just hosted Stani again. And so he was like one of our first guests. We were too early to be hosting Stani back in 2021. But ended up getting this grant to do DeFi education, and then came full circle. We just did a special on the Trump inauguration with him and World Liberty Finance. And so, yeah, everyone ought to check that out. And so, that grant ended up leading into the business model that we ended up kind of going through and testing things out, and then ultimately what ended up today, which is, early on very grant focused, a lot of advertisement focused, and so we would continue to do these podcasts. And the first most straightforward offer or business vertical that we have is advertisements. It's probably the easiest for people to understand. It goes for our website, the rollup.co.co. It's a great website, actually. I'm going to take a moment to shill it because there's a lot of really cool things that are coming to it. We're building out an AI agent, so essentially an LLM that is going to be trained on all of our podcast data. Haven't mentioned this, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it. You can treat this as a announcement. We're going to be working with Story Protocol to mint all of our podcast data as IP. And then programmatically, agents that want to train themselves on crypto information can go and license our data through Story Protocol. So we're going to be announcing that partnership in a couple of weeks. And so the website is going to be having all of these integrations. We'll have an agent on there soon enough. We're going to have, someone that, or excuse me, an agent that can go and make transactions. Really, really cool stuff that's coming there. And so the advertisement offer is the most straightforward. If you go there now, you'll see some ads, like just little banner ads. We have newsletter ads, and then we have, in the middle of the podcast, maybe halfway through, it'll interrupt and it'll say, "Hey, brought to you by our, sponsors." And then we'll do like a voiceover. I want to say that maybe makes up about 20% or so of our overall annual revenue. And it's super straightforward. The listeners know podcasts come with ads. They can skip if they want. Like, there's no one stopping them. But we actually do have a community offer. If you don't want ads and you don't want to skip through them, you can subscribe to the Rollup Edge. And there's going to be a lot of cool things coming up on that as well. It's pretty affordable. It's like $11 a month or something like that. And the only difference between that and the current stack is no ads on the podcast. So like I said, we've got the ads, makes up about 20% of the revenue. We've got this community offer. It's really just no ads on the pods, paid offer called the Rollup Edge. Go subscribe to that. It's about $11 a month. That makes up a very, very minute part of our revenue base right now, maybe 5% or less, probably closer to like 2%. Beyond that, we have a couple other offers. The one that I'm most proud of is what we call our behind the scenes offer. This is something that maybe people don't know because it is a little bit more recent, but we do have a consulting business where we will come in, we'll do a deep dive into a brand's branding, positioning, and their overall messaging and go-to-market strategy. I would say that this business vertical, for anyone who's listening, maybe you're a builder or a founder, this is perfect for anyone that is going from either pre-seed to seed or is already in seed and they're going from testnet into mainnet. Anyone who's like in stealth and thinking about coming out of stealth anytime soon and launching a product, this is where Andy and I come in. And you get Andy and I. You don't get, some, minion on our team, AI agent that's just like what we train. You get Andy and I and our knowledge that we've amassed from having thousands of hours of conversations like these, learning from people smarter than us, and then applying that knowledge in this case. We come in and we do an entire analysis on your business and specifically on your non-technical marketing and branding side. We will work with you. We will do founder alignment to make sure that everyone is on the same page and working towards a common goal. We'll come in and we'll do all these exercises to make sure that you guys are ready to go and launch mainnet and get into a domain that you guys are ready to succeed in, and then also come up with proper campaign messaging so that when you do get into that domain, the messaging resonates with the community that you're trying to acquire. And then ultimately positions you as a leader in a particular category, whether that's a net new category, or it's a category that, interop or chain abstraction. These are already somewhat saturated, but there are paths for new companies to end up innovating and then ultimately end up as leaders in those sectors. This is something that, we only felt comfortable providing this type of service after we had reached that inflection point where it was like, okay, we feel that, we've amassed enough information and knowledge and have a certain perspective where we can graduate from being students to being teachers. And that was an inflection point where it was like, okay, that means that we're ready to go and teach people. And I'm a lifelong learner, and it's kind of a corny phrase, but even just by talking to you guys, and I realize like I'm saying most of the words, I'm answering the questions, I'm still learning just by talking out loud and learning about the questions that you guys are asking. So it goes both ways all the time. But the core element of this vertical is that we come in and we don't fish for you. We teach you how to fish. So we will teach you all of the tools. We'll give you all of our knowledge and all of our perspective on what is a proven successful path, what has worked in the past for other projects that we've seen with our very own eyes, we'll come in and we'll provide that service and that knowledge to you so that you can go and apply it in your own marketing and in your own messaging. I would say this makes up maybe 35 or 40% of our entire revenue. I'm actually going to open up a spreadsheet. Maybe I can give you a more particular number, but I would estimate it's going to be about 30 to 40%. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. This is what we call our behind the scenes offer or our consulting offer. And so actually, no, it's actually closer to 50% or
Wow.
a little bit
So
more
it's like
than that, actually.
5% newsletter, 20% podcast, 50%
Yeah.
consulting, and
so that leaves about 25%. And so the other 25% is educational programs. These are like ecosystem programs. And I know you wanted to talk about Modular March, so we can get into that. It's programs like that. We're going to be doing a whole lot more of those, where essentially what we do, and it's very important that, you know, we stay unbiased, right? Our job is to call balls and strikes. And that is something that I think earned us our reputation early on, where someone would come on and we would objectively look at their project. And I distinctly remember, I'm not going to, you know, throw in anyone under the bus, but there was podcasts that we had back in 21, 22, 23, where these projects would come on. Maybe it was inbound, right? They asked us to come on and we were like, hey, sure. Like, you know, maybe you're doing something cool. We'll learn about it. And they expected softball questions, basically to like soft shill them as they're talking to us. That's not the way we work. For anyone who's watched any of our podcasts, we're going to grill you. Like, we will ask you, because Andy and I are extremely intellectually curious. And it's so important that if I have a question and I'm curious and I'm actually like curious about the answer, I'm going to ask the question. Like,
have you guys had anyone sort of not want the podcast released because of that? Because
there's
you just
been
grilled
one.
them?
There's been one
Okay.
podcast where the guy we grilled him, and I'm not gonna say who it was, but the guy came on. I think he was hitting us up, and he was like, have me on. We're doing all this cool stuff, like, and we're like, at a certain point, it's like, okay, fine, come on, come us on the podcast, and he had recently had like some debacle with the technology, and we asked him about it. Like, we're not gonna not ask him about it. And then, you know, he answers, but it was like kind of like an answer that wasn't really, it was like a politician's answer. And so we pressed him on it, right? Because like, that's our job, is to really get to the bottom of what's going on here. Like, and he really didn't provide an answer, but we continued to press him. And then basically it was like, you know, okay, he's not going to answer the question. Fine. And we just continued going about our conversation. And we're not intentionally mean to anyone. It's just, if you're going to come on, you better not have anything to hide, or else don't come out on our show. That's a public show, right? It's counterintuitive, because if you're coming on and you want publicity, that's fine, but we're going to make your shit public. Like, that's the point of the podcast. So anyway, he ended, after the conversation, he you know, asked for the file. We sent it to him. He and his team reviewed it, and they were like, hey, could you please not post this? And we thought about posting it anyway, but
is it harder now that so many PR agencies have come into the space? Like, does it make it harder as a podcaster to get stuff approved? Like, is that also a necessary bump that teams have now?
Most of our like podcasts get booked like founder to founder. It's like either Andy or I speaking directly with the team. And a lot of times, you know, we'll go to conferences, we'll meet people. It's like, and if it's someone that like we've been following for a long time, right? And you know, we know that they're a cool person. We just haven't really had the chance to have a conversation yet. We'll meet them and we'll basically ask, you know, hey, come on the podcast. And then they'll set us up with their PR, their, you know, assistants and their team. But it's really like the intent is already there from the top, and it's just about scheduling. Anyone, like, there's occasionally PR. PR is helpful in these conferences sometimes, where they can manage things. In real life, it gets kind of hectic, but man, PR agencies are just kind of like, it's like 1 in 10 inbound requests that we get from PR agencies end up coming through to the podcast because it's a good fit.
100%. And before, we'll definitely talk about the conference part. But before that, I was really curious, because the branding of Rollup is very unique, and you were also mentioning about how you help brands with their messaging and understanding their branding. First is, how did you guys come up with your branding? Like, I know that there was a rebrand last year. What kind of thought went into that? And what are some things you notice about brands in crypto right now that have improved in terms of branding, and how were they like a couple of years back?
Yeah. So I am of the mind that rebrands are bullish. Um, I think it is indicative that like there's thoughtfulness and there's intention being put into the brand, and so a refresh every once in a while I think is extremely important. Um, for us in particular, it was pretty straightforward. It was the bear market, DeFi dried up, emissions dried up. People realized that you can't just dump emissions on people and the inflation is not going to lead to the token getting dumped. Doesn't mean that DeFi is dead. DeFi is extremely alive. Literally, watch the podcast with Stani and listen to World Liberty Finance. The president of the United States launched a DeFi project. It's a friendly fork of Aave. They're paying 7% revenue share back to the Aave DAO. This is all in that podcast. It's extremely bullish for DeFi. So it again, DeFi is just one of many applications that is possible on blockchain. Look at Elon shilling blockchain as the ledger and accounting software for the government. Like, this is an entirely new universe of people and regulation and just ideology when it comes to this technology. So, what went into our rebrand? It was essentially like moving from this, just branching out and broadening the scope of the content. We had already started to have a lot more conversations about not only non-financial use cases, but also just broader use cases when it came to the technology. And we wanted to go. This was another really like meta shift. Was that it? We went from the application layer to the infrastructure layer. And if you remember, the infrastructure was like the meta, the entire bear market, like 22, 23 into like mid 23. It was like all about infrastructure. And so we kind of recognized that. Vitalik released the Rollup centric roadmap, and we were like, okay, this is the time. We're not going to wait. We want to do this early while people weren't here. Like during the bear market, that's the best time to rebrand, because then when people come back into the industry, they're like, oh, what's this new cool thing? Oh, they've actually been around for 3 years. What, and then they start like, we have the legitimacy, but it's fresh and it's new. And so people start following along again. And so we started having more of these infrastructure conversations. The Rollup was basically just the idea that like, man, like the Rollup centric roadmap is something that we really believe in. Modularity was starting to come. It was really just starting to come out. And so we ended up really like investing our brand equity into this new paradigm. And it worked. It worked. And so that was the reason for the Rollup. I remember being on calls with our teams, and it's like, and Andy wants to move fast. He's like, first idea that comes up, it's like, that's the one. And I'm like, let's really think this through, because this is something that's gonna like, be with us for the next, for indefinitely, until maybe we do something like this again, but it'll be with us for years. So we ended up coming with the roadmap, the Rollup. Again, a combination of moving from the application layer to the infrastructure layer, the convergence of that with the Rollup-centric roadmap, and then the exit of all of the paper-handed, soft-minded individuals that were here for a quick, easy buck in the DeFi summer days. And the people that really stuck around were the survivors, the builders, the founders. And that's really who the podcast is for now, because they've been with us through it all. And so that's kind of the positioning. That we may have to cut this part out, but the colors are, I think we all have a little touch of the tism. That's what keeps us going around. And so you've guys seen the autism puzzle piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Microsoft has the same colors as the puzzle piece. We have the same colors as the puzzle piece. I think this is just the nature of the industry, man. It's like, we get fixated on problems that other people don't give a shit about, but to us, it's really important, and that's something we got really fixated on, this idea of spreading information and knowledge in our particular industry, that we feel is a force. This technology is a force for good. and we want to share it with the world.
And then Robbie, just sort of doubling down on DeFi Slate to Rollup. I remember we had a lot of conversations like 2023 during DevCon at DevConnect in Istanbul about you guys wanting to double down on this. Would you say that when you guys did Modular March, that was when the brand went like 10x, and like that's when you guys were the guys talking about modularity and you were the front runner in that case?
Yeah, I think so. I think Modular March was impeccable timing. And it's not like we can't take credit for modularity, right? That was like Akram and the Celestia crew that just absolutely nailed that branding. We just saw it and believed in the philosophy, and and uh and it's just about having conviction in something and believing in something, despite the market either not being aware of it or disagreeing with it. And that's, man, that goes back to the conversation that I had with my dad. And it was like, am I going to go into this crypto thing or am I going to go into the 9 to 5 world? Well, I had conviction in this industry and in myself and our company. And I said, you know what? I realize it's early. I realize you may not agree with it. I realize you may not even know what the fuck I do for a living, but I'm going to go do this because I have conviction in it. And I think, a similar thing for modularity. People were kind of aware of it, but it was kind of like, what even, like, people were talking about it, but it really didn't have the gravitas that it has now. And I think after we had an initial education about it and learned about it, just from the jump, it was like, this is the right way to build a blockchain. This is the right way to build an application. And I can talk about modularity for days. I was just on a space yesterday, yesterday, because we're co-hosting Modular Day in Denver. So anyone listening to this, pop out. We're co-hosting with Movement and Celestia. It's going to be a banger. It was last year. It's going to be another one this year. And I kind of talked about like the way it's to me, modularity is born out of Adam Smith and free market economics and the division of labor that allows everyone to specialize, and we connect everyone's specialties together. And so that is the philosophy behind modularity. And I think it is the best economic philosophy that we have today. We're kind of seeing it put to the test with all these tariffs. It's like, what is the right way to do this? Is it tariffs or is it free market economics? I think we're going to kind of fall back to free market. But we kind of, renegotiate what that looks like in the meantime. Anyway, modularity. I absolutely think Modular March was it was perfect timing, and that's why people started to believe in us because they saw that we were early and we were correct in our thesis. And if you're correct and early, people follow you because they also want the edge that comes with being right and early. So that was a turning point.
Yeah, 100%. I still remember like tuning into every spaces, every podcast that you guys used to do during that entire month. It's what got me so bullish on Celestia at that time, and all the different new launches that are coming up. And I mean, it is very complicated at that time to understand all the roll-up centric roadmap and how Celestia works and data availability and all that. So definitely, uh, that's what onboard me as well. Also want to kind of get into, you talked about modularity being your main theme. Uh, so when projects approach you, how do you kind of filter or select based on the theme they're building in or vertical they're building in? And was there any time where uh, you kind of, how do you turn down projects? How do you align vision when you're kind of selecting your projects?
Yeah, a super straightforward answer because like it hasn't changed since we started. The way we select projects is if Andy and I are curious to learn. If the project is doing something new and cool and we haven't seen it before, if the technology is innovative or the way in which they built a community is innovative, we want to learn how they did that. And we also want to share how they did that with the rest of the community. Because we feel like it's something that others can learn from in addition to ourselves. So it really, really just comes down to the fact that, like, can we learn from this person? Can we learn from this project? If so, come on the podcast, let us learn from you, right? And people are happy to do it because it's free publicity for them. So it really comes down to that. Like, are you doing something cool and innovative? If so, we're happy to host you on the podcast. But that comes with a caveat. People may think they're doing something cool and innovative. Host me on the podcast. We're the best thing since sliced bread. No, dude. There's 50 other concentrated liquidity pools. Like, we've seen this before, right? So yeah, it really comes down to just Andy and I. If we think, someone's doing something cool and innovative, we're happy to learn from you.
That's cool. Okay, Robbie, I know we're at time. I'm just gonna rapid fire through questions at you. And if people are interested, they can ask in the comments, or we'll have you on again to sort of deep dive into it. Are conferences important for media houses to attend?
Early on, yes, extremely. Everyone's job at conferences, if you are like pre-seed or if you're pre-seed especially, but if you're a media house, like, and you're just kind of getting started out, maybe, if you're pre-revenue or like pre any substantial revenue, like, absolutely the goal at conferences should be open up as many Telegram groups as possible. Just having access to people is extremely important.
And what's the number one advice you would give to new people starting out?
The number one advice I would give to new people starting out, just don't be afraid. Like, just don't be afraid to, like, have a perspective, talk about it. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to be wrong. It's okay. Like, I think this industry, and not just this industry, but like fintech, technology, AI, all of this and these emerging technologies, people are so concerned about not looking dumb. Like, nerd sniping is like such a big thing in these industries that people like would rather like bite their tongue or pretend, that they know what someone is talking about than ask, like, hey, like, what did you mean by that? Or like, what are you actually talking about? Out of fear of looking ignorant or dumb. It doesn't mean that, you shouldn't come on with like some context and do your research beforehand. But if someone says something and you're like, why is that? Double click on it. Like, don't be afraid to look dumb. Don't be afraid to like ask something if you're curious about it. That's one thing that I think Andy and I are extremely passionate about, is this intellectual curiosity. If we have a question, we're going to ask it or it'll eat us alive. And I think everyone should be like that.
All right. Thanks so much for coming on, Robbie. I know this must have been different, us asking the
I love it,
questions
man.
this time.
I love the change of pace. I'm happy to do it
Cool.
again.
Yeah, no, 100%. And if anyone has any questions to Robbie, we'll definitely redirect here. Thanks so much for doing this, Robbie. Thanks so much for your time, man.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
guys.
sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Robbie. Bye.
Peace.